when well-known liberal student debater Emily Carter walked onto the stage. She was confident her strong beliefs would silence anyone who dared to disagree with her. She had no idea that Barron Trump was about to challenge her in a way she had never experienced before. The debate was taking place at a prestigious forum where some of the smartest young minds from universities across the country had gathered. Throughout the day, students passionately debated important issues, but no one could have predicted what was about to happen during the open debate session. This was a time when any student could take the stage, while others had the chance to challenge them. The atmosphere was filled with excitement and anticipation, as Emily Carter, known for her aggressive debate style, confidently walked to the podium. Her short, purple-dyed hair matched her fiery personality. Adjusting the microphone, she smirked slightly before speaking. "Fellow students," she began, her voice strong and sure, "we're here to talk about progress. But there's something we need to address first: the outdated generations holding our country back." The room fell silent. Some students shifted in their seats, unsure how to react, while others leaned in, eager to hear more. "Look around," Emily continued, her voice gaining momentum. "We're dealing with modern problems, yet people over 50 are still the ones making all the decisions. They cling to their old-fashioned values, their outdated faith, and their so-called patriotism. They refuse to let go of their rigid family structures and conservative beliefs, and we're supposed to listen to them?" Scattered applause broke out from students who agreed with her. Encouraged, she pressed on. In the third row. A tall, well-dressed young man remained. Still, his expression unreadable. Few realized it was Barron Trump, who had been quietly observing the debates all day. "These people," Emily continued, her tone filled with disdain, "can barely use a smartphone, yet they get to decide our future. Their time is up. They are preventing real progress." The applause grew louder. Clearly, many students shared her frustration. Emily could feel the energy of the crowd fueling her speech. "Here's what we need," she declared, her voice rising with passion. "An age limit for political participation. Why should people who won't even be alive to see the consequences of their choices have the power to make decisions for the rest of us?" At this, the room erupted. Many students stood, cheering her on. "These old folks," she added, making air quotes, "are obsessed with their outdated beliefs: God, guns, their so-called Great America. Well, their America is dead, and it's time to bury it." The applause became thunderous. Emily was in her element, growing bolder with each statement. "Their family values and traditional morals are just excuses to resist progress. They built their wealth on privilege and oppression, yet they lecture us about right and wrong. Enough is enough." Meanwhile, Barron Trump sat still, his jaw tightening slightly. Around him, students nodded in agreement, some even shouting in support of Emily's words. "I propose," Emily continued, "that we start a movement to restrict voting rights and political offices to people under 50. They had their chance, and they blew it. Now, it's our turn." At the front of the room, the debate's moderator, Professor Harrison, stepped forward. His face showed concern. "Does anyone want to present a counterargument?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the noise. Emily crossed her arms, a smug smile on her face. "Anyone?" the professor asked again, flipping through his papers, ready to move on. Then, a deep, clear voice cut through the noise. "I would." The room went silent. All eyes turned toward the source of the voice. Emily's smirk widened as Barron Trump stood up. "Well, well," she said into the microphone, her tone mocking. "Look who finally decided to share his wisdom. Daddy's boy himself." A few chuckles rippled through the audience, but Barron remained calm as he walked toward the podium. His tall frame and polished suit contrasted with the casual setting of the debate hall. Emily stepped aside, making an exaggerated gesture toward the microphone. "Go ahead, Trump Jr.," she taunted. Defend your boomer buddies. This should be fun. Barron adjusted the microphone carefully. The audience held its breath, expecting him to struggle under Emily's infamous debating skills. Instead, he gave a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for your passionate speech, Emily," he said, his voice steady and composed. "But passion without wisdom is like a ship without a rudder, powerful, but dangerous." Emily's confident smile faltered for just a moment. She hadn't expected this calm, measured approach. "You talk about progress," Barron continued, "but real progress isn't about tearing down those who came before us. It's about learning from them and building on their knowledge." He paused, letting the words settle. "When you say people over 50 shouldn't have a voice in our future, do you realize you're talking about the very people who created the technology you used to prepare your speech?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Barron lifted his hand slightly. "Please," he said respectfully, "I listened carefully to everything you said. Now let me speak." The audience shifted, intrigued. They weren't used to seeing Emily challenged so directly. "You mentioned smartphones," Barron continued with a slight smile. "Did you know that many of the key innovations in your phone were developed by people who are now in their 60s and 70s, the same boomers you say should have no say in our future?" Emily rolled her eyes. "That's ancient history." "Speaking of history," Barron interjected smoothly, "you said their America is dead. But the America they built gives you the right to stand here and criticize them. The universities we study at, built by them. The economy that funds our education, created by them. The freedoms that allow you to speak so openly, protected by them." The crowd was now fully engaged. Even some of Emily's biggest supporters were nodding thoughtfully. "But they don't understand modern problems?" Emily shot back, frustration creeping into her voice. "Really?" Barron raised an eyebrow. "The generation that survived the Cold War, led the civil rights movement, navigated economic crises, and launched the digital age doesn't understand complex problems? They solved challenges we haven't even faced yet." Emily's face turned red. "And their values?" Barron continued. "You mean things like hard work, personal responsibility, and respect? The same values that built the most successful country in history." He gestured to the room. "Look around. Everything here, from the chairs we sit onto the democratic system that allows us to have this debate, was built by people with those values. And yet, you want to silence them?" A hush fell over the room. "Let me make this even clearer," Barron said. "You call them outdated, but let's look at a few examples. Elon Musk over 50. Bill Gates over 60. The scientists working on curing cancer? Many of them are over 50. The professors who teach us? Most of them are over 50. My father, 78. Should we ignore all of them because of their age?" Emily opened her mouth, but Barron wasn't finished. "In the name of progress, you're suggesting the most backward idea possible: discrimination based on age. Isn't it ironic?" The room was silent. Emily's confidence had cracked. The debate had taken a turn she never expected. "Let's talk about the values you're so proud of. The same values that divide families, dictate who people can and cannot love, and force outdated religious beliefs onto others." "Interesting," Barron said calmly. "You claim to support diversity, yet you mock people's faith. Because their faith oppresses others?" Emily shot back, her voice rising. "Their so-called traditional values are just tools to control people? And you," she pointed at Barron accusingly, "you're just another rich kid, defending a system that keeps you on top." The crowd erupted, cheering Emily on. But Barron remained composed, his expression steady. "Let's think about that for a moment," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You say these values are about control? Yet these same values have inspired millions to fight for civil rights, help their neighbors, and build communities. As for me, call me privileged, but shelters since I was 14. How many hours have you spent helping others, Emily? The room fell silent. Emily's confident expression wavered. That's not, she started. Not what you meant? Barron finished for her. It never is it? When facts don't support your argument, you resort to personal attacks. That's a common tactic when someone realizes they're losing. Don't you dare! Emily's face turned red with anger. She stormed toward the podium, her purple hair wild, her finger jabbing the air. You think you can walk in here with your expensive suit, your polished manners, and your privilege and lecture us about values? The tension in the room crackled. Some students stood, feeding off Emily's rage. You want to talk about helping others? She sneered. Your family represents everything wrong with this country, the rich, the elite, hiding behind so-called traditional values while real Americans suffer. She turned to the crowd, her voice reaching a fever pitch. Look at him! Standing there like he belongs here, defending the very system that keeps us down. Then, spinning back toward Barron, her face contorted with fury, she spat, "This freak doesn't deserve to be here." The words echoed through the suddenly silent auditorium. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, alarmed, but Barron raised a hand. "It's okay, Professor," he said. Quietly, his composure unshaken. Then, turning to Emily, he gave her an almost sympathetic smile. "You know what's interesting, Emily?" he asked, his voice calm. "When facts fail, you start shouting. When logic doesn't support your argument, you turn to insults. And when reason is gone, all that's left is anger. You claim to fight for inclusion, yet you exclude anyone who thinks differently. You preach tolerance but show none. You demand respect while disrespecting millions of Americans who built this country." The room was still, every student hanging on to his words. "But let me tell you what I see here," Barron continued, his voice steady and strong. "I see someone so consumed by ideology that she's forgotten a basic truth. Every generation stands on the shoulders of those who came before." Emily opened her mouth to interrupt, but the confidence had drained from her. "You mock our elders? Call them dinosaurs, ridicule their beliefs, and dismiss their sacrifices. And why? Because they don't share your worldview? That's not progress, that's prejudice." He turned to the audience. "You just witnessed something remarkable. Someone who claims to champion diversity, attacking diversity of thought. Someone demanding inclusion while excluding millions. Someone preaching tolerance while showing absolute intolerance toward different beliefs." Emily's face had gone pale. Her supporters shifted uncomfortably. "But here's the most ironic part," Barron continued, his tone almost concerned. "While you demand we silence our elders, you are benefiting from everything they built. The platform you're using to attack them was created by them. The freedoms you exercise were protected by them. The education you're receiving was made possible by them." Silence. The weight of his words hung in the air. "So tell me, Emily," Barron asked gently, "in your vision of progress, is there room for anyone who disagrees with you? Or is diversity only acceptable when it aligns with your narrative?" Emily opened her mouth, but, for the first time, had no words. Barron let the silence linger before speaking again. "You claim to fight for the future, yet you're making the oldest mistake in history, believing that wisdom belongs to only one group." Emily gripped the podium, her knuckles white. "True progress isn't about silencing voices," Barron continued. "It's about learning from them. Every generation thinks they know better than the last, and every generation eventually realizes how much they still have to learn. The students who had cheered Emily earlier were now deep in thought. "Those boomers you mock?" Barron's voice softened but remained powerful. "They were once young idealists, too. They fought for civil rights, questioned authority, and demanded change. But they learned something along the way. Real progress comes from building bridges, not burning them." Emily's posture slackened, the fire in her eyes dimming. "So, here's my suggestion," Barron said. "Instead of silencing voices of experience, why don't we try listening to them? You might be surprised by how much they understand about change. After all, they've lived through more of it than we have." With quiet dignity, Barron stepped back and returned to his seat. Emily stood alone, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The debate continued, but the energy had changed. Students who spoke after were more thoughtful, their words measured. An hour later, as Dr. Harrison prepared to close the session, Emily raised her hand. "Yes, Miss Carter," the professor asked, wary of reopening the conflict. "May I speak one more time?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Harrison hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, Emily walked to the podium, her steps uncertain. The fierce debater from earlier was gone. "I need to say something," she began, her voice trembling. "Earlier today, I stood here full of arrogance, attacking the foundations of our society and disrespecting millions of Americans. I was wrong." She took a deep breath. "I never imagined that Barron Trump would be the one to show me what true wisdom looks like. That someone I was so quick to dismiss would teach me about real inclusivity and compassion. I'm sorry." Without waiting for a response, she left the podium and slipped out of the auditorium. Later that evening, as students filed out, Emily spotted Barron gathering his things. Heart pounding, she hesitated before approaching him. "Barron," she said softly. He turned to her, his face calm without a trace of anger or resentment. "Of course. I just wanted to say," she struggled, "I'm sorry for everything." Barron smiled. "You know what's interesting about being our age? We're old enough to have strong convictions, but young enough to let them blind us sometimes. That's why the wisdom of older generations is so valuable. They've been where we are." Emily stared at him, taken aback by his kindness. "How are you so wise about all this?" "I've had good teachers," he said with a smile. "People who taught me that true strength isn't about winning arguments, it's about understanding." Overwhelmed, Emily suddenly stepped forward and hugged him. For a moment, Barron was surprised, but then he returned the embrace. That moment, they both understood. It was never about winning a debate. It was about something far greater: wisdom, overcoming pride, and understanding, conquering division.